All right, let's switch gears. As I said off the top, I do think that, frankly, you could say Oklahoma's the biggest story, but I also think you got to say that Mississippi State, man, that story was ginormous, right? Mike Leach, and I said it on Thursday's episode, but Mike Leach coming into the SEC, I feel like it just completely got lost under the radar over the last 6 months because of, in all seriousness, a lot of the real-world issues that have been going on. And we've talked about it a lot. You guys don't want to talk about it here, but I bring it up simply to say that, like, man, Mike Leach, Mississippi State, it's awesome. But even when I thought how awesome it would be to have Mike Leach at Mississippi State, I kind of thought of it as like, hey, Mississippi State generally, no disrespect if we have Mississippi State fans listening, they're generally pretty irrelevant. As I've said before, they're kind of a 7-5-ish type football team historically. And so, heck, if Mississippi State's going to be irrelevant on the field, they may as well be interesting off of it. I think the exact quote I used when Mike Leach was hired was, if you're going to be 7-5, you might as well have fun doing it. And speaking of wrong, speaking of having fun, speaking of taking L's, your boy Torres might have been wrong on this one. Because Mississippi State, day one, hour one, minute one of Mike Leach's tenure at Mississippi State, goes into LSU and gets a W. They beat the defending national champions. And I will tell you, I did have, as one of my best SEC bets from last week, if you listen to Thursday's show, I did say I believe Mississippi State would keep it close. And I did say that I did think that Mike Leach's system would not only fit in the SEC, but I just thought the way that he teaches it, the way he installs it, and I don't claim to be any X's and O's expert, but Gary Danielson and Brad Nessler talked a lot about it, is that it's kind of a simplistic system to implement. It's kind of a simplistic system to teach your players. And so it was one of those things where I kind of felt like, okay, the fact that they didn't have spring football, I didn't think would be as big of an issue for Mississippi State, because the way that Gary Danielson described it was that basically it's about 25 plays, and you just run those same 25 plays over and over and over, and you assume that eventually you'll out-execute the other team. You assume that eventually you'll break a play, and you'll assume that eventually you'll score. And so again, don't claim to be an X's and O's savant, but I did think that Mississippi State would be competitive in this game, but I did not see what was coming Saturday afternoon in Baton Rouge, where Mike Leach, first game in the SEC. How about this? You want to talk, we use the term offensive genius. Like everyone under the sun has been called offensive genius at some point in their careers, including guys like Chip Kelly, maybe not so much anymore, Adam Gase, who might be fired by the time you listen to this. There was talk that he might not survive this weekend. Everyone's an offensive genius. Well, how about Mike Leach actually being one? How about Mike Leach coming to the SEC, and in the first game he ever coaches in the SEC, he sets multiple offensive records. It was the most passing yards ever for a quarterback in an SEC game, Saturday afternoon, KJ Costello, Mississippi State, 623 yards. First game for Mike Leach. First game for Mike Leach, SEC record in passing. And so it was an incredible game, and it was an incredible win, and I'm happy for Mississippi State fans because I know that there's been some highs over the last couple years with Dan Mullen and Dak Prescott, but this is a team that, like I said, they're historically a 7-5 football team. And it's funny because, we think about the Dan Mullen glory years at Mississippi State. How about a crazy stat on this? When Dan Mullen was at Mississippi State, he won 10 games one time and 9 games another. So he had 2 great years when Dak Prescott was there. And then every other year they were 8-5, 7-5, 8-6, 8-4, whatever. And so this is not the great program that some of these other ones are. So first of all, I'm happy for Mississippi State. I'm happy for their fans to have this moment in time. But I think it's also to me, I do think we also have to look at Mike Leach, because I was thinking about this after the game. I think you can make the argument, and I don't even know if it's an argument, I think Mike Leach is the most underrated coach in college football. And like I said, sometimes I come out with stuff and it's like, oh, Torres, that's such a hot take and you're crazy and you're out of control. I don't think this is a hot take. I don't even know if this is a take. Who would be more underrated than Mike Leach? Because when you think about Mike Leach, this is the thing that's amazing about Mike Leach. When you think about Mike Leach, what you have to remember is that the way college football works, maybe more than any other sport, any other whatever, there are definitive haves and have-nots in the sport, right? Like Ohio State. You go to Ohio State. Basically, every coach the last 50 years has won big at Ohio State. Like, I'm not saying I could go to Ohio State, but I mean, I could kind of go to Ohio State and win 7 games. I mean, I could go to Ohio State, and if I just hired the right staff, and I let the staff recruit, and I just stayed the heck out of the way, like, I'd probably be in pretty good shape. I'm not saying I win a national championship, but I'd still be in better shape than Purdue, Northwestern, Minnesota, on and on and on and on and on. And so that's the thing with college football. There's just certain jobs that you just have so many inherent advantages. I mentioned USC a minute ago. USC, the reason that people are frustrated with Clay Helton only winning 9 games is because the ceiling of that program is like, dude, you should be winning 11 or 12. You should be winning the Pac-12. You should be competing for a national championship. And so there are those kinds of programs. And then there's what Mike Leach has done everywhere else. Mike Leach has won big at some of the toughest places to win. For those of you who are a little bit older, probably at least in your 30s, you remember Mike Leach. First of all, a lot of you probably remember him as an offensive coordinator, coming over with Hal Mumme to Kentucky with Tim Couch. You probably remember him going to Oklahoma, winning a national championship with Bob Stoops as the offensive coordinator. And then, of course, if you are college football, somebody that loves college football, you, of course, probably remember him being the head coach at Texas Tech. And it's easy to forget now, right? Like Texas Tech, the last couple years, has had a nice little rebrand, rebuild of what they are, right? Like Patrick Mahomes, best quarterback in the NFL, went to Texas Tech. Baker Mayfield went to Texas Tech for a minute. Cliff Kingsbury, current NFL head coach, went to Texas Tech. So you kind of think like Texas Tech's really not that bad of a program. Well, how about this? Mike Leach's last season at Texas Tech was 2009, okay? During his time at Texas Tech, he won 9 games 4 times. He won 11 games once. And really, when I say he won 9 games 4 times, it was really 5 times because his last year there, he got fired before the bowl game. That was the whole Craig James's son situation. But if you remember to that time, Texas Tech was like competing with Oklahoma and Texas every single year. He had Texas Tech in an era before the 14 playoff in the conversation for the 2-team BCS title game one year. That was the Michael Crabtree, I think it was Graham Harrell was the quarterback then. Like, Mike Leach did stuff at Texas Tech, and you think, well, Texas Tech, they've been good, Patrick Mahomes, blah, blah. You know how many times Texas Tech has won 9+ games since Mike Leach left? 0. He's been gone 11 years now. They have won 9+ games 0 times since he left. He won 9+ games 4 times while he was there, really 5, had him in a national championship conversation. Let me take it a step further. You guys know I live in Pac-12 country. Spent a lot of time talking about USC early in this show. I can definitively tell you, Washington State's probably, if not the worst job in the Pac-12, probably the second worst job. And I don't know if we have any Washington State fans listening to this show. I apologize if we do. But what I can tell you is this. The Pac-12, for all the flack that it gets, there's some pretty good jobs in that league. Oregon has more money than they could ever possibly spend. USC has history as won national championships. Washington has history as won national championships. Heck, Colorado won a national championship in my lifetime back in the early 90s. Stanford's a great academic school. You can recruit a certain caliber of player from all over the country. Cal's a great academic school. Arizona State, at the very least, it has a brand, right? I'm not saying Arizona State's a great football job, but they can probably get kids interested because of certain elements of the university. Washington State, though, is the exact opposite. For people who don't know the geography, it's in the eastern part of the state, in Pullman, in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around it. It's cold. It's dark. It's not like the glamorous Seattle west coast of Washington. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it's cold. And I know they had a little bit of success before Mike Leach got there, most notably when Ryan Leaf was there. Don't want to be disrespectful because they did make a few Rose Bowls in the late 90s and early 2000s, but they were really bad before Mike Leach got there in 2010 or 2000 or whatever. But when he was at Washington State, which again, I would argue is probably the worst job in the Pac-12, he won 9 games 3 times, and he won 11 games in 20. He won 11 games at Washington State. Listen, I'm probably going to piss off some people for saying this. I think winning 11 games at Washington State is probably harder than basically winning a national championship at Alabama, winning a national championship at Ohio State. I'm sorry to be a jerk, and I know we have Alabama and Ohio State fans that listen, and you'll be pissed off, and Torres, you don't know what the hell you're talking. Do you know how hard it is to win 11 games at Washington State? You have no geographic advantage. You have no recruiting pool to speak of. It's cold. It's dark. There's not much there. It's not a big stadium. You play on the West Coast. You play late. You're basically recruiting JUCOs and kids that the Southern California schools don't want. Like, it's so hard to win at Washington State, and Mike Leach won 11 games there. And so when I just look at what happened on Saturday at Baton Rouge, I'm like, man, this guy's doing it again, right? And, like, I get it. I get that he's goofy, and I get that he says weird stuff, and I get that he does these crazy press conferences, and he tweets strange memes, and on and on and on and on and on. But it's like, you look at the actual on-the-field results, like, how many football coaches are just flat out better than him? I'm not going to name names, but there's not many. And for him to go to the SEC in week 1, not miss a beat, as if he'd been there for 10 years, as he basically took his entire Washington State team and just transported them to Starkville, and to go in to Baton Rouge and completely dominate that game, take over that game. They were down 10-7 early in the second, and then they never trailed after midway through the second quarter against the reigning national champions. I just don't think Mike Leach gets enough credit for just how good he is and just what he is capable